When disaster strikes and when it hits the fan, the first responder is the most notable person, the key person that will determine how a situation turns out. And a lot of times it's not even the person that's on the blue team or even in the security department in any way. And it's literally somebody that's in some random department that catches something or notices something. And how they respond to that situation is going to literally make or break the situation. And what we're going to be talking about today is becoming a first responder, training first responders, which is most likely what you're going to end up doing when you go into cybersecurity and become a security engineer. And it's a very important process. This is more an info type of a video where we're just going to be doing a lot of reading and kind of covering of concepts and training and stuff like that, but it's very important. This is an important topic, and the prerequisites for this particular room are the intro to incident response and management, logging for accountability and monitoring, which both of these videos should already actually be up on the channel, so you can go check those out. I think they're actually the last couple of videos that came out right before this video. And these are our learning objectives. What is a first responder? What are the tasks that have to be performed by the first responder? The importance of preserving evidence, processes required to ensure that the blue team can be successful or can successfully take over an incident. And I've already completed this because it's very, very simple room, very easy room, but I wanted you to have this information for your reference. And yeah, that's pretty much it. We're going through the becoming a first responder room inside of TryHackMe. So let's jump into preservation of evidence. Okay, in some kind of, or in any kind of a crime scene or an incident, I guess we can call it, evidence needs to be managed properly. And if it's physical evidence, usually if you've seen in movies, they'll put, red tape around something, or they'll put do not cross tape. I'll show you right now. Evidence, crime scene, let's do that. You'll see something like this, right, wrapped around an environment, and maybe we can even see some kind of a scenario like this. This is probably a really good example of it. You'll see this type of an environment in a movie, and this is a physical crime scene, and they do this because they don't want the evidence to be tampered with, and they want to be able to get all of their investigators and their forensics team in here so that they can gather everything they need to gather before they turn it over and before they clean up the site and do what they need to do, so that whatever that location was, let's say this was a restaurant or something, the restaurant needs to go back to business as usual. But before any of that happens, the forensics team and the FBI and investigators, all those people need to get what they need from that situation. And in the context of cybercrime, one of the things that's really interesting to think about is volatility and the volatility of evidence, which means the liability to change rapidly, unpredictably, especially for the worse, and the tendency of a substance to evaporate at normal temperatures. These are both very applicable to cybersecurity. Even though they're talking about the substance evaporating, we're going to be talking about evidence evaporating, like vanishing into the ether and disappearing. And this is a very, very sensitive time in incident response. And this is probably the most sensitive time in incident response, when something first happens and you need to immediately respond to it, which is why there's the first responder concept. And so the biggest mistake that is performed during incidents is shutting the host down. And this is wrong for two reasons. Number one, the significant amount of important evidence is found in volatile spaces that we'll talk about in a little bit. And that means that it's lost as soon as the device loses power. And the second one is it alerts the threat actor who might be on, who might think that we're on to them, and then they'll do something more disruptive, or they'll proceed to the next phase of their attack because, they were just trying to do reconnaissance, or they were just doing a little bit of research on your system, and now they found out that you're actually onto them, so now they're going to fast forward to the next step of their attack. And turning off the host could be the same as disabling network access on the host, meaning if you disconnected from Wi-Fi or disconnected from the internet, that could literally be set off alarms for the hacker as well, and they would still proceed to the next level of their attack. And this is actually something that a lot of people in IT and a lot of like people in cybersecurity have actually talked about regularly. Like, whereas they'll tell you, yeah, the first thing you want to do is you want to disable it from the network. And it's actually, when I first read through this, I was like, oh, that's kind of an interesting concept. When they say if you disable it from the network, it actually warns the threat actor, or like it kind of alerts them that we might be onto them. And you don't necessarily want to do that. And so that the situation will then be, okay, well, what do you do instead if you don't want that to happen, but you still don't want them to get access to the rest of your network or to do a lot of things? What can you do then in that regard to actually protect yourself and prevent the attack from going further and further? So that's very, very important concept. And of course, we're going to be talking about that a little bit. The Internet Engineering Task Force created a document that is called Guidelines for Evidence Collection. And this is actually a really, really cool document. And this specific piece right here is actually covered in the CompTIA CYSA exam. So this is the order of importance when you're going through digital forensics to try to figure out or to try to pull information from a device. So the first one would be the registers and the cache. The last one would be archival media. And this is literally the order of importance, the order that you should take as you're going through retrieving media when you're doing digital forensics. And the reason why this is important, and we'll talk about right now. So the first level is the registers and the cache. And these are extremely volatile and constantly changing, as there's different applications that get ran or different activities take place. And something as simple as literally copy pasting something can change the data that's inside the registers and the cache. So we would never be fast enough to capture this evidence at the exact moment that you become aware of it. You need to do it as soon as possible. And this is vital for malware analysis, to understand what the malware performed on the host and what it does. And in most incidents, we could not capture this information immediately because it's just way too volatile. So as soon as humanly possible would be the best way to do it. If you can put some safeguards on the machine, that would be amazing. If you can train the staff who's dealing with computers to do something like that, that would be amazing. So this is all very, very important. It's usually, end up being like the branch manager. So if it's a bank, the tellers most likely aren't going to get trained to do this, but an immediate operations supervisor or the branch manager would be the one that would get trained in the blue team with the blue team, so that in case something happens at the branch level, the branch manager knows to step in and go ahead and at least copy the registers in the cache or take some kind of a snapshot from the machine so that you actually have that information. The next level would be the routing tables, the address resolution protocol cache, the process tables, the kernel statistics, and the memory. So something could have happened on a single host. You got to be aware that more hosts could have actually been infected. So you want to have a better understanding of not what just happened with that specific computer, but if it communicated to any other host in the network, what those other hosts were and what other devices were communicated with. So then you got to capture the routing and the ARP tables. ARP tables are the address resolution protocol, which essentially shows, number one, who owns what IP address, but it also shows how many bounces something took, how many hops, I think is the specific term, how many hops something took to connect from one IP address to another IP address. And they have a specific time to live. It's called TTL, meaning if you're unable to capture this data in time, you may not have the full picture of what actually happened, and then you might lose it. The actual suspected host itself, regarding that particular computer, you want to better understand what applications were running and what they were doing at the time of the incident. So you have to capture information and processes that were executing at the time of the accident, and that's what the process table is. And finally, you have programs, the program name that doesn't tell you exactly what it is or what it's doing, especially when you can just easily change the program name. So the program name may have been changed intentionally to actually mislead you. So if you want to completely, fully understand what the program is, you got to collect it from the memory, which is considered to be the random access memory, the RAM. We're not talking about the hard drive. We're talking about the random access memory. And this is something that gets wiped when you turn the computer off. It resets the RAM. So the information located here can be lost if there's a brownout or if the power is turned off. And malware has become incredibly advanced and can stage its different payloads, meaning even if we have a sample of the malware to execute in the sandbox, we can't truly understand what it was doing on the host without actually analyzing it directly in the memory of the device, in the RAM. And then you have the temp files. So applications use temp files, create temp files all the time. For example, a web server, active sessions are usually stored in a temp file, and they're preserved longer on the actual computers, typically not on web servers, but you don't want to take any chances in actually losing those things for the investigation. And then you have the disk, which is the actual hard drive, the actual machine itself, which you can take a snapshot of it. They call it taking an image. The disk duplicator is a very, very basic one. It's a command line tool. And then there's a lot of different types of tools that you can use to take a snapshot of the disk, which basically means you're literally copying everything on that computer so you can transfer it onto a hard drive and use it in a sandbox, so you can do further investigation, and you can make copies of it so you don't tamper with the original copy, accidentally deleting something and doing something, clicking on something that may actually wipe the entire disk, because that's exactly what the hacker wanted, and they wanted to cover their trace, cover their steps, and so that way they designed something that if you clicked on it, it wipes the entire disk. So you take a copy of the disk, you duplicate that, and then you do your investigation on the duplicate copy so that you don't mess anything up accidentally. And then we have the remote logging and monitoring. So in the logging for accountability and monitoring room, we actually went through Splunk. We used a Splunk scenario where we actually backtracked and we tried to find what a specific user did. And logs are a very big part of that. So a host would forward their logs to a secure remote location. Typically, this is a part of the backup. And so even if the remote location doesn't have an infinite log retention policy, they still do this. And at this stage, we're not sure how far back the incident goes. So we want to make sure that we preserve these logs as far back as possible while the investigation is still ongoing. And then you have the physical configuration and the network topology, which at the time of an incident is not usually volatile, but this evidence can actually assist you in the investigation. And understanding and preserving this is a very important thing. For example, which subnet the host was connected to. And if you don't know subnetting, I would recommend you look into subnetting. It's kind of complicated at the beginning, but when you study it for a little while, or if you reread some of the articles or rewatch some of the videos, there's a lot of great videos on this. You kind of understand what it actually means, and it's very important. Subnetting is when you essentially break apart sections of a network. It's also called a network segmentation, so that one specific segment of the network operates by itself, and then you have another segment of the network, and if something happens in one of these segments or one of these subnets, it doesn't leak into the other ones, and it doesn't infect the other networks, the other subnets and the segments. So you want to make sure which subnet the original host was connected to, if it actually communicated around with the rest of the subnets. And when you understand the scope specifically means how wide, how many devices were affected in this particular context. That's what they're talking about. And then once you understand that, it kind of helps you get a bigger picture of what actually happened, and if you need to go look at any of the other hosts that need to be investigated. And finally, you have the archival media. So this is basically backups. It's not necessarily volatile, which means it doesn't necessarily just go poof and smoke, but it can actually be used as evidence to try to figure out how far back the incident went when comparing artifacts on the actual disk, and whether or not those artifacts can be found on backups. And usually they're not going anywhere, so you have you have a bit more breathing room to focus on the more volatile, for example, that temp file system or the routing table or the registers, so on and so forth. So the two really big don'ts that they mention to tell us is, don't trust the programs on the system. That means that you don't want to use the actual software on the host to perform your collection for a lot of different reasons, but one big reason is that the hacker could have actually altered that program, and when you try to use the program on the original system, you either are tainting the evidence or it just wipes the evidence. So for example, there's a thing called Velociraptor. There's a software called Velociraptor. There's another one called Redline. I did an entire series of videos on digital forensics and incident response. So you can go and check out all of those videos. And we used a lot of various tools for digital forensics and incident response. So for example, let's say there's a copy of Redline on the infected host, and you as the digital forensics analyst, you're going to go and run Redline to do your digital forensics on the machine, but the hacker knows that you're probably going to try to run Redline, so they're going to change that program. They're going to infect it with some kind of code that once you turn it on, it wipes the machine. And that's a big situation. That's like a big catastrophic kind of a situation. So you don't want that to happen to you. Another one is don't run programs that modify access to times of files. This is also a really big deal. So when you copy paste something, it actually changes that file. Even if it's in a small capacity, you're not really even doing anything. You're just copy pasting something, but it changes the file specifically when it was accessed. So that date and timestamp on that file is now changed. And it could have been some like that specific timestamp would help you so much in your investigation, but now it's ruined. It's been changed and you no longer have that, and you can't use it anymore in trying to backtrack the steps of the attacker. A big concept in digital forensics is called chain of custody. And chain of custody is also done in regular forensics or regular investigations without any kind of cyber or IT involved. And it basically means who found the evidence, how did they handle it, who was the next person that handled it, what did they do with it, and all of these things needs to be documented so that you understand the chain of from when it was originally found to when it finally made it to either the court proceeding or the official investigation with everybody, all the stakeholders involved and things like that. And in a lot of cases in digital forensics, we will take, for example, when you take a disk image, right? So we talked about taking a disk image right here. When you take a disk image, you immediately want to get the hash value of that disk image that you took so that you put it on the chain of custody form, and at any point, if that hash value changes throughout the chain of custody, we know that somebody tampered with that disk image. Something was done to that disk image that is no longer the original image that was found on the crime scene. So chain of custody is very, very important. And these are the things that just needs to be, it needs to be taught to somebody. For example, the teams that would be the first responders, that you say, hey, listen, when something happens, don't do anything on the machine. Don't click on anything, don't open anything, don't run anything, leave it alone. If you suspect that something has happened, leave it alone. That's like if all else fails, if you do nothing else, just don't do anything. And don't touch anything, don't tamper with anything, because we don't want any of this to be altered by the time that the blue team actually gets to the site. So it's very, very important that the teams that are involved in this, like the actual man on the field kind of a thing, those people understand how important this is so that they don't accidentally do anything that ruins everything. So the question is, what priority order for preservation is given for the disk, which was the fourth? What priority order for preservation is the archival media, which was the last thing, number 7, is the register and cache, which was the very first thing. And the term that's used to describe ensuring that evidence can be used in legal proceedings is called the chain of custody. And just like that, we are now done with preservation of evidence. So let's talk about alerting the relevant stakeholders. All right, when an incident takes place, there is something that should be available to everybody, which is called the incident playbook. And inside of the incident playbook, there should be a breakdown of all the types of incidents that have happened and how they responded and the best ways to respond. And in case something does happen, here's what we want you to do, and here's what we think you should do to respond to it. So for example, if we're dealing with a phishing campaign. So you have a suspected email, you parse and evaluate the email. If there is a URL or an attachment, you would do something. If there is no URL or attachment, you would do something else. So if in this case, if there is no URL or attachment, you email and notify and thank whatever the user is, and then it ends. But if there is a URL or an attachment, then it's, okay, if it contains an attachment, get the hash value of it, send it to VirusTotal, and try to figure out whether or not it's malicious. If it contains an URL, do the same thing and try to figure out if it's malicious. And if it is, then you delete the email. If it's not, then you can go ahead and try to proceed accordingly. And if somebody opened the attachment and it ended up being a malicious attachment without going to VirusTotal to try to check the hash value of it, and we've done this in other videos as well, and you can easily try to figure out how to find the hash value of something. So that part of it is not that difficult. But once you have the hash value of something, if the people at the branch level, the people at the level where they're actually interacting with the email, if that person isn't aware that they should be checking the hash value of a file, and or the hash value of a domain name or a link that comes to see if it's actually malicious, if they don't know that, they'll accidentally click on it. And sometimes it's as simple as opening up a PDF file where the macros of the file have some kind of a code in it, meaning like basically the kind of stuff behind the scenes that nobody actually sees. When you open a file, and you think you just opened some kind of a Word document, but behind the scenes, the code of that file and the macros, there was some kind of malicious payload in there, and you opened it, and now you've inflicted damage and inflicted chaos upon your device and your network. So just simply checking for a file and the hash value of a file against the database of a place like VirusTotal, which is really dope, and they have a lot of great resources that you can check, because it's like a giant database of all the different viruses and whether or not something should be concerned, you should be concerned about something or not, right? So the next piece that's inside a playbook is the call tree, which is the list of the people that you should call and who needs to be notified immediately and who takes the lead and notifies everybody else. And that's really the kind of the best way that you can explain it. So it's like if somebody down here deals with something and found something in an email, for example, they would immediately tell their immediate supervisor, and the immediate supervisor would then tell their supervisor, and it would just go up the chain. If somebody in the upper part of the chain finds out that, hey, this is what's going on in the company and we've been hit like this, so if you get anything from this sender, if you get anything that resembles this is what I need you to do, or this is what you should not do. Same thing, right? So there's the call tree that in either order it can be found. And then in this particular example, there's somebody who could not be called, or there's somebody who should not be called, right? That would be also important to try to figure out. And if somebody was fired and they're not in this position anymore, if they quit and they're not in this position anymore, that means the call tree, that specific person cannot be reached, therefore they can't pass along the message. So it could even be like this, where it's like, this is the immediate person, the teller, let's say. This is the teller, this is the customer service supervisor, which is their immediate superior, and then this would be the branch manager, let's say, and then the branch manager reports to the district manager. And in this particular case, this teller didn't have their supervisor to communicate with, so that they need to know that they need to go to their branch manager, or for whatever reason, if this person can't be contacted or should not be contacted, maybe they're the suspect in the entire process. So the call tree itself is very, very important, and it's usually best practice to communicate. When, if you're in doubt, just communicate with who your leadership is and let them know what's going on. The responsibility of the first responder, and so this is what happens. This is where you come in when it comes down to training people. So you may perhaps not be the one that's actually creating the playbook or even creating the call tree, but you maintain a responsibility that has to be to ensure that the division is prepared to deal with an incident. So if we continue with the example of a fire, for example, maybe you're not the one fighting the fire, but you are the one that needs to know where the fire alarm is, where the nearest exits are, where the fire extinguishers are, specifically if you need to handle it immediately, if it's a small enough fire or something. So when it comes down to cybersecurity, you have a responsibility to prepare the division for an incident and ensure that they understand where they can log an incident and who to contact in the event of an incident. So you may not be the one that's handling the incident, but they need to know who to contact immediately and what to do or what to not do in case they're suspicious of something. The term that best describes a defined process that the blue team follows during an incident, that's called a playbook. And the term that describes the structure used to inform all relevant parties is our call tree. So very, very easy, simple. Hopefully this is all making sense and it's easy for you to understand. So now let's talk about isolating the incident. All right, for isolation and containment, I want you to think about this particular image, right? So quarantine. When you quarantine somebody that, for example, is patient 0 in a situation, or right now when I do it, it brings up everything from COVID and the pandemic. So let's say quarantine patient 0. I'll do that. Let's see what that shows us. Still, not so much. I'm trying to find the particular image that I think is really important. Okay, there we go. This one's a little bit better. So the quarantine bubble, if you can think about that, right? So it's like somebody catches something and somebody is sick, and you want to stop that from spreading. You want to prevent that from spreading. And so you put them in a bubble like this. That might be kind of drastic, but this is like the street version of this, right? Where this obviously is the person that either is sick or they have a weak immune system, whatever the situation is, and they are now in quarantine, not so they don't infect somebody, or if they don't get, so that they don't get infected. And that's the really, really big issue right here. So what we are trying to do in a digital environment is we are trying to quarantine. I didn't want you to see that because I'm actually working on something, a cool piece of content that is going to come out. And if you're watching this and you notice that, you can obviously reverse the video or rewind the video and go and pause that particular frame to try to figure out what it is, and you'll get a good idea of what the upcoming video is going to be. But I'm really excited about that video. It's going to be a really cool video that's going to come out. So what we're doing in a digital environment, in a cybersecurity environment, is we still need to contain the host that was infected. We need to contain the network that was infected. And once we've contained it, we need to eradicate the threat and then recover the system and the network to get it back to running as business as usual and making sure that everything is all good. So this is part of the NIST incident management framework, and these are grouped together, and it actually breaks apart to more steps that you need to take, but this is a legitimate series of steps. So you want to contain whatever the situation is, whatever the threat is, whatever the malware is, any of that stuff you want to eradicate, and then you want to recover the network and the system so that you can get back to business as usual. Containment methods in the context of cybersecurity are network segmentation, physical isolation, and virtual isolation. So network segmentation, as we talked about earlier, has to do with subnets and various segments of the network. So the host would be isolated from the network perspective by being placed into a different network segment. This isolation aims to ensure that the infection can't spread to other hosts, or you want to put them inside of a network segment that has been designed to be a honey trap. And this is it's like a really tricky little strategy. It's like one of those clever little strategies that you want the attacker to think that nothing's wrong, and you want them to continue to do whatever they were doing. And even more so, you want to give them a little bit of extra bait that they think everything's all good, and now, oh, what is this extra vulnerable device that's inside this network, and let me go and attack this particular device. And then if they do that, you reverse engineer their location, you reverse engineer their device. You can go look at their webcam on their computer or on their phone and whatever, and literally just reverse engineer everything about them just so you can find out who you're dealing with. So this is actually a really cool concept of putting the isolated host, or isolating the host from the part of your network that's actually important, and then putting them inside a part of the network, inside a segment of the network that is either there's no harm to be done, or there's a honeypot in there so that you can reverse engineer the attacker. I love this stuff. This is so freaking cool. Then we have physical isolation. So the host is collected and fully isolated from the network and users. For example, if it's a workstation or a laptop or an IoT device. And this aims to ensure that no further actions can be performed on the host and the evidence is preserved. And this is more for the actual user. So you want to take it away from the user so that the user accidentally doesn't do anything to tamper with the evidence. And then you have virtual isolation, which means the host is restricted from communicating through the use of software. For example, in endpoint detection and response, there's a lot of different programs that allow you to jail the host, meaning it's only allowed to communicate with specific entities on a network and perform certain actions. And the goal of this is very similar to confiscating the host, but can be performed remotely. Furthermore, it's also if the EDR, meaning if the endpoint detection and response tool itself is compromised, that might not actually work for you. And this can also be done in the context of putting them, allowing them to communicate with a network device that is designed to be the honeypot. So you could still do that in this concept as well. So sending threat actors back to dial-up days. So this was when we referred earlier to not disconnecting them. So you don't want to disconnect the device from the internet because it might alert the threat actor and they might move on to the next step of their attack or do something even more harmful. So if you don't want that to happen, then what you do is you just, the thing is actually very, very interesting. It's called rate limiting. So you rate limit that device, meaning you just basically slow them down, like slow that internet connection down to the dial-up days. I remember the dial-up days, and I remember getting 128 kilobytes per second, or kilobits. I'm going to say kilobits or kilobytes, whatever. 128 kilobits per second was like, oh my gosh, this is super fast internet. And now I have a gigabit, 1,000. You know what I mean? It's like, it's just, I can't even imagine going back to the dial-up days because it's like pulling teeth. You have to wait. I used to have to wait like 15-20 minutes for a song to download that I could listen to it, and now you can instantly, at the click of a button, you can instantly stream that song without any kind of buffering or anything like that. So sending somebody back to the dial-up days in this specific context means you haven't disconnected them, so their malware is still connected and there is no flag that goes up. It's just that it's slow. So they don't suspect that we're onto them because everything is still working. It's just slow, and they have to use command and control channels, and they would be able to command and control channels typically means some kind of a command line interface, and they would not be able to pinpoint the exact problem that's causing their slow connection. So slowing down the connection allows the blue team to have more time to do their investigation and try to figure out exactly what's going on without alarming and alerting the threat actor, the hacker. So the responsibility of you, the first responder, or the security engineer, right? So the responsibility of the first responder is that they need to, again, manage this particular situation to contain if they know what to do, because this kind of stuff is the responsibility of a security analyst. So this kind of stuff is not something that a teller would do. However, they need to know that, hey, this seems fishy. This seems like something's going on. I don't exactly know what's going on, but this doesn't seem right. So I need to communicate with my branch manager and I need to communicate with the security department. So you, as the security engineer, may not be responsible for isolating the incident, but you will be relied upon as a subject matter expert to help the team understand what containment methods may be possible and to understand what the impact would be by implementing those containment methods. And that's your job as the security engineer, but the first responder would be the one that immediately notices something and communicates. So that's kind of the theme for a first responder, is like if they notice something, they're usually not the one that's going to take the action. They need advice from somebody. They need consultation from somebody to take the actions that they have to take. But they are the first responder, meaning they're the one that just noticed what happened. And so they're the one that needs to speak up and reach out and say, hey, I think something's going on. So what do I do? Right? That's what it is. So what containment method can be performed remotely using endpoint detection and response? And remotely talks about virtual isolation. What would be requires the blue team to collect the infected host, the machine itself? That would be physical isolation. And of course, what method aims to ensure that the infected host cannot communicate with other hosts or other devices in the network? And that would be network segmentation. And just like that, we are done with isolation. So let's go into the business continuity plan. So the business continuity plan, what they're talking about in this course is that it helps you gain some superpowers. So but this is assuming that you've contained the incident and you've done the things that you got to do to prevent the incident from escalating and amplifying into something bigger. So once that's done, now you can kind of start thinking about, all right, how do we go back to business as usual, right? So your business continuity plan is probably going to be inside of your playbook. It should be inside of the incident management playbook, the incident response, incident management playbook. And it's literally the next phase. So it's like, all right, this is the first thing that you do. When you notice that something's going on, this is what you got to do to contain it. And then when we talk about recovery, as we talked about recovery, business continuity is a part of recovery. And there's actually another version of this, which is called the disaster recovery plan. And typically the disaster recovery plan is inside of the business continuity plan. So disaster recovery is more technical. It's more directed to the actual incident itself, how to recover from that disaster. And then once you have recovered from the disaster, this is what you do to go back to business as usual. And that's what the business continuity plan is. So first, to create one of these things, the first thing that you want to do a business impact analysis, which means what is the worst possible case scenario that would happen to this business if something hit the fan. And by doing this kind of an analysis, you can determine what would happen in the event of an incident and then how it would impact not just the organization, but the customers themselves, because it could be a data leak of customers. And now you're really in it. And now you really got to freaking do some damage control. So that analysis is usually performed using a combination of qualitative and quantitative measures. Then you have define the potential recovery actions. So based on the particular worst possible case scenario, you need to have a series of actions for each possible thing. I mean, we would literally go back to this thing right here. This is a version of, all right, so if this happens, then you need to do this. If that happens, then you got to look at this. Is there an attachment? Okay, if there is, then this is it. If there's a URL, then this is it. And then you do this, and then you do this, and then you do this, and then you get to the end, right? And that's what a business continuity plan / disaster recovery plan does for a person. So when you do the potential recovery actions, you're doing, all right, if this was the situation, if this is what happens, this is the next step that you do. And then you do this, and then you do that. And so that's what that means. So for example, in this case, if one of the production servers becomes unresponsive and has to be isolated, you could potentially switch to your disaster recovery server, so your backup server basically. And documenting the recovery actions will allow the team to recover faster during an actual incident. And maybe if you're using some kind of a CSP, a cloud service provider, if you're using a cloud provider, you can automatically set it up that, hey, if something happens on this particular server, I just want you to automatically go to this backup server so there's no disruption of service for our customers. In the eyes of the customer, nothing happened. We're figuring everything out in the back end to try to figure out why this server just crashed. But in the eyes of the customer, nothing happened. It's business as usual for the customer. Then you can plan the BCP team structure. So the business continuity plan team structure. There are certain, obviously, if it's a big company or if it's a big incident, there's a lot of responsibilities. And those types of responsibilities need to be assigned for beforehand, right? Before anything actually happens, those things need to be assigned. And one of those things could be documenting actions and alerting stakeholders. There could be literally somebody that's just responsible for documenting everything, and then there's somebody that's just responsible for alerting the stakeholders. And these responsibilities have to be planned and documented together with the details of the individuals that would perform them. All of that needs to be done in advance, not when something happens, but way before something happens, so that you can do a tabletop exercise and you can rehearse all that stuff. And that's where we get to here. So testing the BCP plan, you do it doing some kind of a tabletop exercise. It's very similar to a table read when actors get together and they just go through the script just to get the beats of everything, get the flow of everything, so that everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing. This is no different. Rehearsal makes it so that when something actually happens, you've gone through it so many times during rehearsal that you're now just going through the motions, and your emotions aren't as high. You don't have as much anxiety because you've already gone through the worst possible case scenario, and you have a plan for the worst possible case scenario. That's what's very important. So once you've premeditated all of your responses and you've imagined the worst case and you've rehearsed that multiple times, you're cool as a cucumber when the actual incident happens, because you know exactly what you're going to do in each possible case. So BCP metrics, so business continuity plan metrics. So these are things that are very important to know in advance, right? So the recovery point objective is the amount of data that we're willing to lose, basically. So what is the maximum amount of data that you can lose before things become really bad? And if that is, for example, every hour, so if you can't lose more than an hour of data, then you need to do a backup. A backup needs to be running every single hour. That's what that is, right? So that's your recovery point objective. You can't lose more than an hour of service. You can't lose more than an hour of data, etc. Then there's the recovery time objective. So the amount of time that's required to recover your system. And what is that objective? So what's that goal for that recovery time? We can't be out of service more than an hour. We can't be out of service more than 30 minutes. That's our recovery time objective. Then the work recovery time, which is the amount of time that's required to recover the software and the data of your system. So the backup, basically, how to actually get everything back to functioning order. That's what work recovery time is. The maximum tolerable downtime, which is basically the RTO and the WRT combined. So RTO meaning the recovery time objective, the amount of time that's required to recover the system, and the amount of time that's required to recover the software and data of the system. Those two things combined can't exist this thing. So the maximum tolerable downtime, meaning the amount of downtime that you can tolerate, the maximum amount of downtime that you can tolerate can't exceed this particular amount. Then you have the mean time between failures, which is the average amount of time that the system can operate between incidents. What's that average amount of time? So between failures, we get a good 3 months of operating time. All right, that's great. Between failures, we get 1 month of operating time. Okay, that's not so good. Between failures, we get a week of operating time. That's pretty bad. You need to figure that out. Or we get a day of operating time between failures. That's really bad. Like, you really got to figure that out. You don't have a business. You're always putting out fires every single day. That's not good. So that's what that means. The mean time, the average amount of time between failures, between incidents. And then the mean time to repair, the average amount of time to recover something. If you have an incident every week and it takes you 4 days to recover it, you are in really bad shape, right? So that's what those things mean. So what does BCP stand for? It stands for Business Continuity Plan. What does DRP stand for? Which is your Disaster Recovery Plan. The BCP metric that is used to describe the amount of time required to recover the hardware of your system, the hardware of the system, is the recovery time objective. And what is the BCP metric used to describe the average amount of time that is required to recover the system? And that is the average amount of time required to recover the system is the mean time to repair. Mean is average. So your mean metrics, I actually learned this from algebra, and that was one of the useful things that I took away from algebra. Most of the things I use calculators for nowadays. But the mean metric, that's what that means. It's the average metric. So that's what we got for our business continuity plan, our BCP. And let us go into documentation of actions. Documentation is really important because ultimately you need to update your playbook, and ultimately you need to have a debrief type of a meeting, a lessons learned kind of a meeting, where you actually go through everything that just happened. And when something happened, this person gave this order, and that order had this effect. And the binary of that would be it either worked or it didn't work, or it worked or it made it even worse, right? So all of these things need to be documented so that after the incident, you can debrief and go through your lessons learned scenario. So the templates that are available, and there's a lot of these things, you can find them probably on the NIST website, you can find them by just Googling around, but these are some of the key points that need to be inside a template. Time at which the action was requested. So they should be in UTC just to make sure that everything matches depending on where people are across the globe or across the country. The time at which the action was requested. So somebody requested an action to be done. What time was that? What was the update or the action that was performed? The description of what was actually done. What was the reasoning to do that? Who was the person that approved that specific action? And who's the person that was responsible for performing that action? And then time that the action was actually performed. So the time that it was requested, what was requested, what was the reason for that request, who was the person making the request, who was the person completing the request, doing that request, and then what time did they finish that request, what time did they actually complete that action, and then what happened afterwards. Once they did that action, what happened? Did the situation get better? Did the situation get worse? So on and so forth. And what you see here is somebody updating an Excel sheet, but depending on how chaotic the situation may be, this might not even be possible. And again, based on what we talked about earlier, this is a pre-established person. Like somebody was assigned documentation. This is their role. When something happens, your job is to take really, really good freaking notes. And in that particular case, if it's super chaotic or if there's a lot of people involved, if there's a lot of voices in the room talking and doing all these things, you may not even be able to do this appropriately, efficiently. So you might need to record the situation. You might need to record everything on your phone camera or on a voice recorder, just so you have all of the data running immediately, and then you can update and kind of check back with your document. So it's like you would be doing this documentation, obviously, but you're also recording what was going on, just so in case you missed anything or in case you needed some specific details, you have it. And then what's really good about recording is that you also get a timestamp that's associated with those things, and you can say, okay, at this time, this is what happened. At that time, that's what happened to the second, right? You get to be able to do that if you're actually doing the recording. So obviously the above specific thing was just essentially the person doing all of this, right? So the time that the action was requested, the description that was requested, so isolate the infected host. The reasoning for this is to make sure that the malware can't spread to the rest of the network. The person that approved the action was Jane Doe. The person that was responsible for performing was John Doe, and they completed at 14:39, so literally 5 minutes later. And the malware indication of compromise, so let's wait for that to load, But I'm assuming that the malware indication of compromise didn't spread, right? We're not seen on any other hosts in the same network. That's what the result was. So lessons learned, as we mentioned already. So documentation is very, very important for updating the lessons learned document to make sure that once something like that happens again, if something like that happens again in the future, now you're not guessing to do the right thing. You're going to do exactly what worked last time because you updated your playbook and you had your lessons learned from that. So what time format should be used in our incident notes to ensure that all the times match, and that is the universal time. So making great progress here. Last piece, handing over. So the handing over process. All right, so it says, congrats, you've served your role as a first responder. The blue team has fully taken over, but we're not out of the woods yet. Make sure to support the team as they work on closing the incident. And what we're going to do here is we're going to view the site. And as soon as I click on this, there's going to be a timer that's going to run down. And now we have to respond accordingly. So an incident has occurred and you're the first person on the scene and have thus become the first responder. What are you going to do? You're going to preserve the evidence first. Then you rush on the scene and make sure that the evidence is preserved, making sure to take it into consideration the volatility of the evidence, and you make sure everything's preserved for the forensics team. But you're not out of the woods yet. What is the next thing that you got to do? You got to what? Raise the alarm or isolate the incident? I'm going to raise the alarm. Okay, great. Alerting everybody that has been involved in that there's an incident. A team is put together to help you, but you're not out of the woods. So what is the next thing that you want to do? Now you want to isolate the incident. Okay, great. Everything's been contained and isolated, and you make sure that nothing else is spreading. So what's the next thing after you contain it? Now you want to invoke business continuity. And you invoke business continuity. This makes sure that the team is equipped and make sure rapid changes are going on. So now what do you want to do? Now you want to document everything that just happened. Great, you documented everything that just happened. So what is the final thing that you do? You hand it over to the team. And great, blue team has arrived. And here's our flag. So very good. Easy stuff. The first time I did this, I didn't realize that there was a timer running down. And I don't know what just happened. There was like a big bang outside. I don't know if you heard that. I wonder if that actually recorded. That was crazy. But yeah, the first time that I did that, I didn't realize that there was a timer, and I was just taking my sweet time going through it. And I was like, oh my God, this is actually about to, like, the clock is about to run down and blah, 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 blah. Like just some manufactured drama there. So that's it. That's it for our first responder situation. So hopefully you got some really good information out of this particular video. And now you know a little bit more about what it takes to become a first responder. All right, it's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker. I hope you found value in this video. If you did find value in this video, I encourage you to like, subscribe, and turn on that notification bell so that you can become a part of our community, and maybe even drop a comment. The comment section is always going on. Look at that. We already have a couple of great new comments that come in that I got to respond to. But I mean, the comment section is always lit. There's always a lot going on, and people are asking questions, saying hi, whatever it is. So it would be amazing to also have you be a part of our community and to hear from you. And if there's anything that I can answer for you, then great. This was a good thread right here. Look at this. This whole thing just went on. But yeah, it would be amazing to have you be as a part of the community. So like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on notification bell, all that good stuff so that you get notified the next time that a video comes out. And yeah, it's your boy Hank Hackerson at Hank Hacks Hackers, your favorite network and system attacker. If no one else loves you, Hank loves you. Love, peace, and chicken grease. And I will see you in the next room. Later.